As you may know, before I retired early about 2 years ago, I spent my career in political consulting and journalism. And for political geeks, this site is really meaningful. So you may have seen there's a plaque out at the T Street entrance of the hotel, and locals will often call this the Hinckley Hilton, because this is where John Hinckley Jr. Attempted to assassinate President Reagan in 1981. Fortunately, he was unsuccessful. But this room is actually incredibly important in DC history. So, slide time now. We'll switch to that. This room has been for decades the site of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is often called by locals Nerd Prom, which is really like a lot like FinCon. We dress up, we're nerds here. But a lot of things have happened in this room. You may recall, if you're a Twitter user, you know the GIFs. You may know that one of Obama dropping the mic. That happened like right here, boom. It was also in this room that many people believe Donald Trump decided to run for president. So a really important room in a historical sense. This is not a political talk, don't worry. But I'm framing it this way because, given my past in politics, and also just the fact that we're here in our nation's capital, there are some really wonderful analogies to be drawn between personal finance and politics. One of them, a really big one, a persistent myth, is that authenticity and authority are opposites. This idea that we can either be experts or we can be real with our audience, that these things are mutually exclusive or they are opposed. And you see this a lot in politics. You see people who feel like, okay, I have to show that I'm the smartest or the strongest or I have the best different ideas. And we see that in personal finance too, right? A lot of us sometimes feel this push to be an expert and to show that we make perfect decisions, we have perfect judgment. But the reality, and what this talk is actually about, is that authenticity and authority can't exist separately. They're intricately connected, and to be real authorities to our audiences, we must be real with them. We must be real people and share our real selves. That's hugely important. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And in politics, if you think about this, I'm sure you have all had the experience of seeing a candidate, hearing them talk, something like that, and you think, I just don't like that person. They seem too slick. They seem too phony. Maybe I get this sense, I can't really explain it, but it feels like they're telling me what I want to hear and not what I think they believe in their heart or they believe from their life experience. That's a judgment we make instantly before we even consciously recognize it. And it's something we do with personal finance experts too, because we're all, we're judging folks. That is how we operate. And I want to give you a personal example of sometimes how this can play out. So when I knew I was going to do this talk, first I was so excited. But, of course, the first thing you think is, okay, I'm going to be on stage. What am I going to wear? Right? I think even guys can relate to this, but especially the ladies, right? We know. So I did some research, as so many of us do, and I quickly found this article, which New York Times, talking about viral TED Talks, what better source than this? And you don't even need to read the article. You quickly see a couple of things that jump out at you. You see, first, everybody's a little dressed up, so therefore, sequins before 9 a.m. You also see a lot of blue, so I knew, okay, I have to wear a blue jacket. Great. And then it wasn't specifically in the article, but I think women are definitely trained to think, okay, you're going on stage, you got to wear like really tall heels, so can we get a shot of this? I'm wearing like very impractical, sparkly fake. The only problem is, this is a lie. This is not me. This is an actual shot of my closet at home. This is not a black and white photograph. This is a color photograph. That is what I wear. I might be fine with purple hair, with some color elsewhere. I sometimes wear colorful makeup, but I wear black all the time. That's all I wear. Also, these shoes, I'm sure you've noticed I am a little awkward walking in them because I cannot do it. I'm faking it. And it's making me have to think about it, and that's distracting my attention from the actual message. So, let's fix this. Bethany's going to help me. We're playing Mr. Rogers right now. You can sing along. Can anybody sing the Mr. Rogers song? All right. Oh, so much better. Yay. So, I'm no longer dressed like what I'm supposed to be dressed like to be up here. But let me ask you, do you think that I know less about money now? Do you think that I am less of an authority on talking to an audience on any of the things we're talking about today? No, of course not. That's not how audiences think. All of that idea of what I'm supposed to look like up here, how I'm supposed to present myself, that's me. That's my baggage. That's my insecurity. That's my feeling that I have to listen to the experts and do it the right way instead of my own way. So that's really what we're here to talk about. This is a visual metaphor, by the way. I love visual metaphors, so thank you for going along. I'm so glad we didn't have a wardrobe malfunction. But I'm not talking about appearance. This isn't about what your blog looks like, what your website looks like, what your podcast artwork looks like. This is not about what you look like either. This is about the choices you make in how you tell your story, in how you share who you are, what you tell readers and audiences, what you don't tell them, the angle you put on it, all of that. So, back to this idea of being an expert or being real. We have this idea that we have to present ourselves as experts to get people's attention. But in reality, what people want is folks they can relate to. That's ultimately not just who you follow, but who you stay with over the long term. In politics, there is shorthand for this. We call it the beer test. So you're probably familiar with this idea. This is the question of what candidate would you rather have a beer with? It turns out this is actually a terrible test. It's a really bad way to decide who should be the leader of the free world. And if you ever use this in hiring, it's equally bad. Don't do that. It just tends to hire the same kind of people, and you don't get a very diverse team that way. But it is a remarkably predictive test of who we're going to vote for. You can see this bit highlighted here. But we tend to vote for the nicer or more relatable person all the time. Every election except Nixon in '68. We voted for the person we'd want to have the beer with. So why does that happen? Obviously, we trust people we're voting for. We think they're going to do the best job. And it's similar to the trust we're trying to build with our audiences. We want to make sure that they know, okay, you can rely on the things you're learning from me. You're going to make hugely consequential decisions in your life on the basis of what you're learning from all of us here in this room. So trust is essential. But trust is not a rational decision. If it was, think about it, who would we elect president? We would elect the smartest PhD college professors, the most experienced diplomats, but we don't do that. We elect people who we think are charismatic or like, oh, I like where their heart is, I like their ideas, because trust is ultimately an emotional connection. We have to first relate to someone to feel like we know them a little bit. We know where their heart is. That's how we get to that emotional connection, which then is what creates trust. So this is really, I think, at the core of what it is to be real, is to make yourself relatable, to share the truth of your life. So how do we actually do that? Of course, that's always an important detail to cover. First thing is by sharing the truth of what your life is like. You know, something that a lot of us do that's sort of a half step, not the full step, is we say, okay, I'm going to talk to you about my mistakes. Here are all the mistakes I made in the past. But now I have my act together. I never make any mistakes now. Right? Does that sound familiar? Yeah. So that's a great start, but that's not the full truth of your life. That's half of it. To be really real with our audiences, we have to share not just the past mistakes, but the present ones, the ones in real time, the things we're screwing up now, the things we go, oh, I shouldn't have done that, that was boneheaded. That's what makes us human, and that's what makes people follow along with us over the long term, so they don't just learn what they need to learn from us and then move on. We want to keep them along on the journey. That's how we do it. So let's take, actually, one more slide before we do that. So there's also an important mindset that is really important in that, which is, if you think about every reality competition contestant ever, what do they always say? They always say, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to win. We want to actually do the opposite of that, which is, I'm here to make friends. If you can think of your project this way, whether it's a blog, podcast, book, video, if you're a journalist, any of those things, if you're talking to your audience as friends, you will get them to trust you and to come along with you. Let's take a couple of examples here outside the FinCon space, people who have been able to really achieve something amazing with their audience. First is the blog, the book, and the podcast Young House Love. Anybody know them? Yeah. some enthusiastic superfans, which only underscores my point. So John and Sherry Petersick have been blogging for over a decade. They are a DIY house blog turned into a whole empire. And what is so special about them is that they share the mistakes along the way. They've never pretended to be experts, but yet they still have a lighting line, and they've done a paint line with Benjamin Moore. I mean, they're hugely accomplished, but they still don't say, oh, we're expert interior designers. They're also not afraid to look goofy, as you can see from their photos. They're totally into that. And they share a lot about family life that's really real. They don't sugarcoat any of it. I mean, their stuff is beautiful too, so millions of people love that, but it's really about feeling like you're getting to go through this journey with your friends, John and Sherry. The next example is a sad one. Unfortunately, Rachel Held Evans died earlier this year after a brief illness. It was terrible, but she was a writer about evangelical Christianity, which is a topic that doesn't always welcome a lot of questioning. And she brought a really unique view to it of saying not just, okay, I believe this and I'm going to lecture to you, but instead saying, you know, here's something I've been thinking about and wondering about and maybe doubting. What do you think? It was about welcoming people into the conversation. And that brought millions of people to her because they knew she would answer their questions from her heart, that she would be really thoughtful, that she wouldn't just give the dogma answer because that's the right answer. And that was something that people stuck around for, and that when she died, there was a huge outpouring of grief all over the world because of what she'd built. Third example is a food blogger. Angela Davis was, oh, we have some knowledge, woo. She was a home cook, she was an accountant, she had a little food blog, and she's gradually grown it into a massive empire where she has media, she has cookbooks, she does Sunday dinners, she has a whole thing. And it's because she doesn't shy away. I put her Twitter up here because she says self-taught home cook. Cooking is much like personal finance in that in order to be credible, you need to say, oh, I went to this culinary school or I apprenticed for this, Michelin-starred chef. She doesn't do that stuff. She just says, this is me, this is what I've learned, this is what I have to offer. And she puts that right out there. But people still love her food. And the truth is, an interesting thing with food is most people who read her blog are never going to taste her food, but they still follow along because she's so real. She talks about the insecurity of being alongside these fancy chefs, of the challenges of making money work when you work for yourself. I'm sure a lot of folks in this room can relate to that. So these are just 3 examples. I really encourage you to check out their sites to see how they really share their full selves with readers and not just their topics, because it's something that is worth emulating. It's good to step outside the FinCon bubble sometimes to get some examples. Let's look at a few things that they do exceptionally well. So these creators in particular are authentic because first, they talk to you as a peer. They don't assume that they know more than you. We should never assume that. We know things, we should assert what we know, but we don't necessarily know more than anyone else, and that is valuable. So talking to people as peers, as friends, we're all in this conversation together. Probably my favorite thing they do is they all admit mistakes, and not just the past ones, but in real time. They don't pretend to have all the answers. They don't call themselves experts. The amazing thing is people see them as experts. People ask John and Sherry for their design advice, even though they're not designers. People would ask Rachel Held Evans really hard theological questions, even though she wasn't a theologian. So you don't have to call yourself an expert or assert that you are an expert to be seen as one. I think that's a hugely important lesson. They share their own struggles with tough questions. There have been a lot of them, obviously faith questions with Rachel, and with John and Sherry, they actually quit blogging for a year and did a New York Times interview about why, and then they came back and did more interviews about why, and they shared all their thought processes, and these are not like clean, tidy thoughts. These are hard things to reckon with. And finally, they don't try to please everyone. We, of course, want to be welcoming to everyone. We want everyone to feel like they can come to us and they can experience something, but it's natural that some folks are going to resonate with what we do, others won't, and that's okay. We need to let them go and focus on our own audiences, the folks who can relate to our experiences. So let's be real about what all of us do. We are hugely helpful to millions, maybe billions of people collectively, but ultimately what we do is not rocket science. It's not like each of us is inventing a new system of math or a new way of doing a spreadsheet. I mean, this is fairly basic stuff. Our audiences don't need to read 100 blog posts or listen to 100 podcast episodes to learn everything they need to know to have a great financial life. They just don't, right? And that's a fact. There's only so much of this information out there, and we've all pretty much shared all of it. But What matters is not the information per se, although that's important, we need to present it accurately, but how we present it, how we share our stories, because it's the story that is going to hook people and keep them with you over the long term. They will read 100 blog posts, they will listen to 100 podcast episodes if they're in it with their friend, if they're in that journey with you. And ultimately, what we all want is to feel understood. We all want that. Psychologists actually say that the desire to feel understood rates above the desire for happiness. And that absolutely applies to all of our audiences. They want to see someone who they can relate to in some way. And there's another side of this too, though, that I think is worth mentioning. So we lovingly here call ourselves money nerds. And when I did the nerd prom thing, everyone was like, yeah, nerd prom, like we're all nerds. That's cool, we're nerds, yay. But outside of this room, outside of this conference, I suspect that sometimes some of us, maybe some of you can relate to my experience of often feeling like the nerdiest person in the room or feeling a little too uncool to hang out with the cool kids and the rest of life. This is like the one exception. It's my favorite part of the year. But us feeling understood is important too. You feeling understood, knowing that when you hear from people who read your stuff or people who listen to you, that they see you. They don't see this facade you've created. They don't see the version of you in the blue jacket and the pink sparkly heels that like is struggling to maintain upright posture. They see the version of you with all the warts, all the blemishes, all of it, because that's how you will feel understood. And so this is really a win-win. It's about building your audience, keeping them with you, but also making this worth your while, not just financially, but also, spiritually, ecumenically, if you will. So the last thing I want to leave you with is this wonderful quote by Maya Angelou. You've probably seen it before. It's one of my favorites, but I think it really applies here to what we're talking about. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. It's true. People might forget some of the intricate details of the financial principles you share with them, but they won't forget if you make them feel seen, if you share yourself, you share your story bravely, you share your vulnerability. That is what they will remember, and they will stick with you for it. Thank you.